We continue now at the top of Daf Gimel Amid Beis in Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 73b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara said that if wine falls into wine, let's say you have wine of Isser, even the smallest amount that falls into wine of Heter, so it asers b'cholshu, it makes the entire mixture of wine forbidden, even the smallest amount. That's because it's min b'mino, it's of similar kind. However, let's say, for example, you would have wine and water, so in such a situation, the water actually can be mevatel the wine, unless the wine of Isser is imparting some kind of taste. But other than that, we would say that the wine is bottle in the water. And so the Gemara now is discussing a case where you have wine of Isser, Yayin Nesach, falling into a bore of wine, which is mutter, and also there's a pitcher of water that falls in. And so here you have a situation where on the one hand, you can look at the water that's being mevatel, the wine of Isser, but on the other hand, you can look at the fact that it's wine of Isser falling into other wine, and b'cholshu, it can aser b'cholshu, and therefore maybe all of the wine should now be considered to be wine of Isser. And so the question is, how do we deal with such a situation? And we're going to have a machlokas amoraim on that issue. Amar Chizkiya says, Higdilu be'isser aser. If it increases in isser, in prohibition, then it is forbidden. But Higdilu beheter, but if it increases in heter, in what is permitted, then mutter, then it is mutter. We will see Rashi in a moment what Chizkiya means. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu Higdilu be'isser mutter. Rabbi Yochanan says, even if it's Higdilu be'isser, it is going to be mutter, meaning to say Rabbi Yochanan is more lenient than Chizkiya. And Rashi explains, Higdilu hamayim v'hayayin be'isser. If it increases, the water and the wine increase in the isser, meaning shenafal yain nesach besof. Let's say the yayin nesach falls in at the end, v'higdilu, and therefore it increases the amount of isser, then aser, then we say it is forbidden. In other words, what Chizkiya is saying is, higdilu be'isser aser means, if it is a situation where we can say that the yayin nesach increases, it multiplies, because all of the other wine that's in the bore also now is considered to be aser, so then we're going to say it's aser. V'lo amrinon roen es haheter ki'ilu eino. We don't say that we discount the mutter wine that was in the bore. We don't view that part. We view it as if it's not there. Rather, we say no. The yayin nesach attaches to the other wine, and it all becomes aser. The ein hamayim rub and olive, and the water that's there is not considered to be a majority more than the yayin nesach, because the yayin nesach has now increased a lot. And certainly, im naflu mayim besof. If the water falls in at the end, then certainly the water is not going to be able to do anything. Like we said earlier, meaning to say, it doesn't matter whether the water falls in at the end or whether the water falls in before. That makes no difference, because as long as the yayin nesach can attach to the other wine and make all of that considered to be yayin of isser, so then we say that it's going to be aser. Chizkiya, however, does say that it's if igdilu beheter, if it increases in what is permitted, meaning to say as follows: Shenafal yayin heter besof. This is the only case where Chizkiya is going to say it's mutter. Let's say you have a situation where you have the water and the yayin nesach, they're in a container, and the water has essentially already been mevatel the yayin nesach, and then wine of heter then falls in. So then already kvar batel yayin nesach b'mayim. Then already the yayin nesach is already batel in the water. Shamayim rabu olav biyoso levada, because the water was a majority when they were all alone. Or once already the wine of the yayin nesach was bottled, it's not going to reawaken. In other words, what Chizkiya is saying is, if you can isolate the yayin nesach in the water and be mevatel that yayin nesach in the water first, that's igdilu beheter. So then we'll say the yayin nesach is like it's not there. When it falls into other wine, everything is going to be fine. That actually seems like an obvious leniency. But essentially, in every other situation, if the situation is one in which the yayin nesach was not yet bottle, and the yayin nesach at a time that it wasn't yet bottle in the water, the yayin nesach goes into that big bore of yayin, so then it actually is going to awaken all the rest of that wine, so to speak, and all of that wine is going to be considered to be wine of isser, and the water will not be able to be mevatel it. That's what Chizkiya says. And again, Rabbi Yochanan then said, Afilu higdilu be'isser mutter. What does that mean? For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu higdilu be'isser, even if it's higdilu be'isser, means to say, Hoel umayim naflu tchila. Rabbi Yochanan holds, since the water fell in first, and Rabbi Yochanan is specifically talking about a situation where the water fell in first, lo amrinan matzah min esmino. Then we don't say that the like kinds found one another, meaning to say, if you have a large bore of wine and water falls in there first, and then a little bit of wine falls in, so then the wine actually will be bottled in the water. We will not say that the Isser wine awakens all the rest of the wine and makes that considered to be like Isser. However, let's say it would be the other way around. Let's say the water would fall at the end, so then actually actually we would say that the yayin nesach awakens all the rest of the wine, and the water would not be able to be mevatel. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zera, Leima Chizkiya v'Rabbi Yochanan. Let us say that Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan, B'plugsa Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan kamiflagi. They're arguing in the same machlokas as Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan in the Mishnah that we're about to bring from Meseches Orla. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah of Meseches Orla, as follows. So or shel chulin v'shel truma. Let's say you have leaven of chulin and you have leaven of truma. Shenaflu l'socha isa, and they fall into dough. Lo bazeh kadei l'chametz v'lo bazeh kadei l'chametz. This su'or does not have enough on its own to ferment, and the other one also is not enough. In other words, the su'or of chulin is not enough to make the dough rise, and the su'or of truma on its own is not enough to make the dough rise. V'nitzdarfu v'chimtzu, but they combine together and they cause it to ferment. They make the dough rise together. So the question is, does this dough have a status of chulin and it's permitted, or does it have the status of truma and it would therefore be forbidden? Rabbi Eliezer says, Achar acharon anibo. You have to follow whichever su'or fell in last. If the su'or of truma fell in last, then it's forbidden. If it's the su'or of chulin that fell in last, then it is permitted. V'chachamim omrim, and the chachamim say, Bein shenafal isur b'tchila, whether the isur fell in first, uvein basof, or whether it fell in at the end, it doesn't matter what the order was. Eino asur at shehebo kadei lahachmitz. It's not asur unless there's enough in the isur on its own to be able to ferment. And Rashi explains, Amar le Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah said to Rabbi Zera, Rabbi Yirmiyah lo have a kimlei betamayu. Rabbi Yirmiyah actually did not understand the reason behind the machlokas between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan, and the Gemara will go on and explain the actual reasoning behind the machlokas between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan as the Gemara goes on. But Rabbi Yirmiyah did not understand what their reasoning was. V'savar, so he thought the time of the Chizkiya mishum the achar achronani, but he thought that the reason why Chizkiya was strict was because he follows whatever fell in last. Meaning to say, let's say you have a situation, again, you have a whole vat, a bore of wine, which is mutter, and into that wine falls in some water first, and then falls in a little bit of yayin nesach, a little bit of wine of isser. So since the yayin nesach fell in last, that's why Chizkiya said that it was asr. That's how Rabbi Yirmiyah understood Chizkiya. And Rabbi Eliezer, that would be like Rabbi Eliezer. Hilkach nafal yayin nesach basof. Therefore, when the yayin nesach falls in at the end, asr, it is asr. But nafal kasher basof. But let's say it is the kasher that falls in at the end, mutter, it is going to be mutter. When we say over here that the kasher falls in at the end, what we mean to say is that the actual yayin that is mutter falls in at the end. Meaning, you have a situation, again, which Chizkiya described, where the yayin nesach is in the water, it's just the yayin nesach in the water, the yayin nesach is batel, and so now there's like no yayin nesach, it's considered as if that's totally nullified, and then you have coming in the wine of heter, then he would say that it's mutter. That's how Rabbi Yirmiyah understood what Chizkiya was saying, that you always follow what's last. For Rabbi Yochanan k'Rabbanan, and then we're suggesting that Rabbi Yochanan follows the Rabbanan. That's why Rabbi Yochanan says that if the water falls in first, then we're going to say that it is mutter in such a situation, because he holds like the Rabbanan. There has to be in the isser alone enough to nullify the water. Aval heter lo yitzdaref imo levatel asamayim. The heter is not going to be mitzdaref together with it to nullify the water, v'lesor, and to make it usser. And so therefore, that's why Rabbi Yochanan says, again, if you have a situation where the water can be mevatel the yayin nesach, the water falls in first into that vat of wine that's mutter, the water falls in, and then the yayin nesach falls in. So we say that the water is mevatel the wine in that situation. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'tizbra, is that really logical? Can you really say that the machlokas between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan is the same as the machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim? It's two completely different issues. V'omar Abaya, but Abaya said, Lo shanu ela shekadem v'silak eso iser. This entire discussion between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim is talking about a situation where the person actually removed the iser. In other words, you have a situation, let's say, the se'or of truma fell in, and then that was removed, and then the se'or of chulin fell in, so then you have a machlokas. But let's say the person did not remove the isser, so then asr, so then actually it would be forbidden. And Rashi explains, Lo shanu Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer only said, Dimnof leheter basof mutter. He only said that if the heter falls in at the end, that it's mutter. Again, let's say you have a situation where the se'or of truma fell in first, and then the se'or of chulin, and in that situation, Rabbi Eliezer said mutter, but he only said mutter, Ela shakadam v'silak es isser. That's if you actually went ahead and removed the isser. V'lo nishlam hashir afilu al yedei tziruf. So then you don't have through the combination, you don't have the amount that's necessary to ferment. Avalo kadam v'silko, but let's say he didn't remove it. Let's say the isser is still there. Then you put in some heter, and then it combines and causes it to ferment. So then mitzdarif heter l'isser lahashlam esashir. Actually, he does say that the heter combines with the isser to say that there's a sufficient shear, and Rabbi Eliezer actually would say in that situation that it is usher. Meaning to say, when Rabbi Eliezer says achar acharon aniba, actually Rabbi Eliezer is stricter than we initially thought. Rabbi Eliezer holds that as long as the isser is there, as long as it is in the mixture, we are going to say it's forbidden. So even if the isser did not fall in last, even if the isser fell in first, but you left it there, it still has the status, so to speak, of an achron, because it's still there, and then when the heter falls in as well, we are going to be strict. As long, essentially, as the isser is present, Rabbi Eliezer says we're going to be strict, because we'll say it combines with the heter, but it does create that isser. And the Chachamim say it doesn't matter. If the isser on its own cannot cause the dough to rise, so then it's not going to be usher. And so the Gemara therefore continues, according to this explanation of Abaye, Chizkiya Damar Kaman. So who would Chizkiya even be going like? Rashi explains, Chizkiya Damar Kaman, who could Chizkiya follow? Ik Rabbi Eliezer Kamar, if Chizkiya is following Rabbi Eliezer, Afilu Higdilu Beheter Asr, so then, even if it's a Higdilu Beheter, it should be Asr. In other words, if we're going to say that all these cases are the same, so even in that one case where Chizkiya said it's mutter, the case where Chizkiya said it's mutter is, let's say, at the very end, you put in the yayin of heter, meaning to say that the yayin esach was batel in the water first, and then you add the yayin of heter. But if he's following Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer says as long as there's isser present, it's a problem, so then that also should be asr. Because here there certainly is no removing. You're not going to be able to remove the yayin esach at all. Now, if we're following the Rabbanan, afilu higdilu be'isr mutter, so then we should say, even if it happens be'isr, even if it increases be'isr, it should always be mutter. To ha'amrina, afilu nafal isr besof, ain't no asr, because the whole point is, the Rabbanan say it doesn't matter what happens, even if the isr falls in at the end, it doesn't make any difference what the order is. If it's not enough to create an isr, then it's not going to be asr. And so the Gemara continues and explains, Elahacha, rather over here by the machlokus between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan, it has nothing to do with the machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan with regards to Sa'or. Rather, Beroin kamiflagi, they're arguing about Rowan. We'll see Rashi in a moment. L'Chizkiya lesle Rowan, according to Chizkiya, we do not hold of Rowan, and Rabbi Yochanan isle, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, he does hold of Rowan. And Rashi explains, Elagave plugsa de Sa'or, rather, by the machlokus by Sa'or, when it comes to the leaven that's falling into the dough, Ikolamemar Chizkiya Rabbi Yochanan Tarvayu, you can say Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan, both of them, Ikar Rabbi Eliezer, Ikar Rabbanan, both of them can follow Rabbi Eliezer, both of them can follow the Rabbanan, because the two arguments have nothing to do with one another. The time of Dahachu Dahasam lo dami, because the reasoning over here and over there are not similar. The Sa'or Hainu Taima de lo batal, when it comes to the Sa'or, the reason why it's not batal is Mishum de Mesakin Lakuli, is because it is helping to fix, so to speak, it's helping to prepare the entire dough. V'isure lav b'mashu, and over there, the isra has nothing to do with the fact of a mashu, it has to do with the fact that it's contributing to fermenting the dough. Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbanan, bazev v'zegorim pligi, Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan are arguing what happens in a case of zev v'zegorim. In other words, you have a situation where both the isra and the heter are causing the preparation of the dough. What happens in such a situation? Rabbi Eliezer is strict, and the Rabbanan are lenient. That's the machlokus over there, and it has nothing to do with the machlokus by yayin nesach. B'yayin nesach, when it comes to yayin nesach, b'mino isuro b'mashu v'shalo b'mino b'nosein tam. There, it's the issue is different, because when it's the same kind, again we said that by, let's say it's wine, yayin b'yayin, the yayin nesach falls into the wine, the isser is b'mashu, even the smallest amount creates the isser. And let's say you're talking about a situation of yayin falling into water, so then it's not similar kinds, so then we say it's b'nosein tam. And so that's the issue over here. The question is, do we say that the water is mevatel the yayin nesach, or do we say that the yayin nesach causes all the rest of the yayin to also be considered isser, and the water is not mevatel it? That's the machlokus. Uplugsa de Chizkiya v'Rabbi Yochanan misham mino v'sheino mino. The machlokus between Chizkiya and Rabbi Yochanan is, what do you do in these situations of mino and sheino mino? As Rashi now continues and explains, uveroin kamiflagi, they're arguing about rowan. Chizkiya savar, Chizkiya holds lo amrinan, we don't say rowan es mino ki iloeno, that we don't look at the mino, we don't look at the rest of the wine. He says we don't say that. And therefore, since we don't say that, and we're counting the rest of the wine, the rest of that wine actually counts as wine of Isser, because it's Asr b'mashu. V'she'eno mino rub olavu mevatlu. And then we would say that that the not similar kind, meaning the water, is the majority and it's able to be mevatel the yayin nesach. We don't say that. Elakevan the yayin kosher kodem leyayin nesach, since the yayin kosher was there before the yayin nesach. V'yayin kosher have it rubba al hamayim, and there was more wine than there was water. So kinafel yayin nesach, when the yayin nesach falls into that whole mixture, matzah min esmino v'neir, it finds the other wine, it awakens it, and therefore it actually is, there's more iser than heter. That's why chizkiya is strict. Avol kinafel nesach bereisha, but let's say you have a situation where, in the one case where chizkiya is lenient, if the yayin nesach falls into the water first, it's just yayin nesach and water, so then batal le b'mayim, then already the yayin nesach is nullified in the water, the mayim have it tfei olea, then the water is the majority, v'chihadar nafal kosher, and then when the kosher then at the end afterwards falls in shari, it's permitted to misha batal yayin nesach, because once the yayin nesach is actually batal, lo amrin and choser v'ner, then we don't say it awakens again. Again, Chizkiya holds if the yayin nesach was batal, then at that point in time it cannot awaken the other wine. But if it's a situation where the yayin nesach was not batal, so let's say again the yayin nesach falls in at the end, for example, you have water falls in to all of this permitted wine, and then yayin nesach falls in, so it wasn't batal when it fell in, so then in that situation it will be able to awaken everything and cause the isser. For Rabbi Yochanan, some Rabbi Yochanan holds, kevan the nafal nesach lemino vishe'eno mino. Let's say the yayin nesach falls in last again, and it fell into a mixture of wine and she'eno mino and water. Rowan es mino kilueno. That's the rowan. We view the mino like it's not there. We don't count the rest of the wine. Vishe'eno mino rubba olavu mevatlo, and the eno mino, the waters, is a majority, and it's able to nullify it. But the Gemara continues and asks, "Umi islay Rabbi Yochanan Rowan? Does Rabbi Yochanan really hold of the concept of Rowan?" Again, Rowan results in a leniency because we're not looking at the wine of Heter, and we're just saying that there's more water than the wine of Isser, and therefore we're saying the wine of Isser is batal. V'haboimine Rabasi me Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabasi asks Rabbi Yochanan the following question: Shnei kosos, let's say you have 2 cups of wine, echad shel chulin v'echad shel truma. One is chulin and one is truma. Umazgan, and then he dilutes both cups. He adds water to both cups. V'irvan zebazeh, and then he mixes them both together. So Mao, what's the halacha? And so over here, if you hold of Rowan, the halacha should be that we're lenient, because Rowan, we don't count the wine of Heter, and therefore we say that the water is more than the wine of Isser, and it would be batal. However, V'lo Pashatle, Rabbi Yochanan did not answer the question. Apparently he doesn't hold of Rowan. And the Gemara says, Meikara lo Pashatle. Originally he actually didn't answer the question. But Levasof Pashatle, but in the end he did answer the question. He says that we do hold of Rowan, and we can be lenient. And the Gemara continues, it's Marnami, was stated as well. Amar Rabami, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabami says that Rabbi Yochanan says, V'amri lo Amar Rabasi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Some have the version that Ravasi says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, Beis kosos, if you have 2 cups, echad shel chulin v'echad shel truma, one is chulin and one is truma, umazgan, and he dilutes them with water, v'irvan zebazeh, and mixes them with one another. Rowan es haheter kilo enu, we view the mutter wine as if it's not there. V'hashar mayim rabin olavu mevatlin also, and the rest of the water is a majority. It's able to be mevatel the wine of Isser, and therefore again Rabbi Yochanan is lenient in this situation. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, "Zeh klal." This is the rule. Min b'mino b'mashu. If it's of the same kind, so then it asers, it makes it forbidden, even if the smallest amount of iser goes into the heter. Shalo b'mino. But if it's not of the same kind, minos and tam, then it has to be enough iser to impart taste. Then it makes the mixture prohibited. And the Gemara says, Ravu Shmuel da'amri tarvayu. Rav and Shmuel, they both say, Kol isurin shebetorah b'minan b'mashu. All isurin in the Torah, if it's the same kind, the prohibition takes effect if it's even the smallest amount of iser. Shalo b'minan, but if it's not of the same kind, b'nos and tam, then it has to impart taste. Zeh klale la'asuyei mai. And according to this approach, when our Mishnah says this is the general rule, la'asuyei mai, what is that coming to include? La'asuyei kol isurin shebetorah. That comes to include all other isurin in the Torah, meaning our Mishnah is talking about yayin nesach, but this rule applies to all isurin in the Torah as well. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, the Yamri Tarvayu, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, they both say, Kol Isurin Shebetorah Bein B'minan Bein Shalo B'minan B'nos Ein Tam. All Isurin in the Torah, all prohibitions in the Torah, whether it's of the same kind, whether of different kinds, if it imparts taste, then we say that it creates a prohibition. Chutz mi tevel v'yein nesach, except for tevel and yayin nesach. Tevel is, let's say you have produce where you didn't separate the trumas and meisers, that's tevel. So if you have tevel or yayin nesach, then we say b'minan b'mashu, if it's of the same kind, even even the smallest amount creates the prohibition. V'shelo b'minon b'no sein tam, but if it's not of the same kind, then it has to impart taste. And according to this approach, v'zeh haklal la'asuyeh tevel. According to this approach, the general rule in our Mishnah, the zeh haklal in our Mishnah, is coming to include tevel. The tevel is treated the same as yayin nesach in this regard. And the Gemara continues, Tanya Kavase de Rav, Ushmuel Tanya Kavase de Rav Yochanan v'Reish Lakish. We have a brisa like Rav and Shmuel, and we have a brisa like Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Tanya Kavase de Rav Ushmuel, we have a brisa like Rav and Shmuel. Kol Yisurin Shabbator b'minon b'mashu shalo b'minon b'no sein tam. All Yisurin in the Torah, if it's the same kind, then the smallest amount creates the prohibition. If it's not of the same kind, it's when it imparts taste. Tanya Kavase de Rav Yochanan v'Reish Lakish, we have a brisa like Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Kol Yisurin Shabbator bein b'minon bein shalo b'minon b'no sein tam. All Yisurin in the Torah, whether of the same kind or not of the same kind, it's if it imparts taste. Chutz mi tevel v'yayin nesach, except for tevel and yayin nesach, b'minon b'mashu. In that case, we say if it's of the same kind, even the smallest amount, shalo b'minon. If it's not of the same kind, b'no sein tam, then it's when it imparts taste. And the Gemara says, Bishlama yayin nesach. Now I understand yayin nesach, why that would be different than other isurin. Mishum chumra da avodas kochavim. That's because there's general stringencies by Avoda Zara, and that's why when it comes to yayin nesach, we'll be more strict when it comes to mixtures. Ela tevel my time, but when it comes to tevel, why should we be more strict by tevel? And the Gemara says to that, Ke'eteiro kach isuro. The reason is, just like the way that we matir by tevel, you're able to take even the smallest amount off as truma, and that maters the entire pile. So too when it comes to Isser, even a mashahu, even the smallest amount, is going to create the Isser. Again, tevel and yayin nesach, b'minon b'mashu, shalo b'minon b'no sein tam, and that's why b'minon, it's going to be b'mashu, ke'etero kachisuro, the way it's permitted is the way we forbid. D'yomar Shmuel, as Shmuel says, chita achas poteres asakri, even taking one kernel of wheat off of the entire batch of wheat, that's going to be enough to pater in terms of the separation of truma. And the Gemara says, Utanan and Namihachi, we have a Mishnah like this as well. When do they say that tevel forbids with the smallest amount? B'mino, that's if it's of the same kind. Shalo b'mino b'no sein tam. If it's not of the same kind, then it has to impart taste. And that Mishnah is a Mishnah in Meseches Chala. And Rashi explains, Chita achas poteres hakri, 1 grain of wheat exempts the entire heap. Mitruma, it exempts it from truma. Dahalo isparish shiura dida, because there is no shear that's actually given for how much truma a person needs to separate. Elo reishis degoncha, it just says reishis degoncha, the beginning of your grain. V'afilu kaldu, even any amount you're going to separate. V'rabbanan hu diamri, it's the rabbanan that say, ayin yofa echad me'arboim, ayin roa echad mishishim, beinunis echad mechamishim. They say if a person is generous, they give 1/40. If a person is stingy, they give 1/60, and an average person gives 1/50. And again, the Mishnah said, Omru tevel isur b'mashu b'mino. When do we say by tevel that it creates isur even by the smallest amount? That's if it's of the same kind, Omru. That's when they said that. Aval shalo b'mino, but if it's not of the same kind, b'no sein tam, so then when it's when it imparts taste. Mishum dev'mino ikol avemer k'hetero kach isuro. The logic is, because by b'mino you can talk about hetero kach isuro, because the whole idea of the heter is b'mino. It's the same kind. You're separating from the heap itself. You're separating that one grain. Aval shalo b'mino, but if it's not of the same kind, that logic doesn't apply. Alma taima mishum hachi, you see that is the reason. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Ayin Dalid Amud Aleph.